traditional KYC is dead. And the reason is that when actually you think about fraud and why it's growing so much, all fraud happens after KYC. Fraud happens after the company has made sure that the customer is passing all of the relevant checks that are needed to create an account.
Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of Public Key. We have new hosts, a new look, and new amazing guests to discuss crypto and blockchain, policy and financial crime, tech, and everything in between. I'm today's host, Caitlin Barnett, Director of Regulation and Compliance at Chainalysis. A scamdemic is something we could have never imagined, but with the evolution of blockchain, crypto, and AI, we are right in the middle of the new age of fraud. The best person to share what is at the heart of this systematic shift by criminals into the worlds of Web3 is Trisha Kathari, CEO and founder of Regtech firm Unit 21. Trisha shares her journey from a Google intern to leading a successful Regtech startup that is at the intersection of AI and fraud prevention. And we explore strategies from tech giants, the rise of AI and financial fraud, and the increasing prevalence of scams in the crypto industry. She also shares Unit 21's innovative approaches to data monitoring, fraud detection, and leveraging AI to enhance compliance to combat financial crime. Before we jump into the episode, the 2025 Chainalysis Crypto Crime Report will be released within a few weeks, and the team have put out another teaser to hold you over until the full report is ready. This week's blog talks about the ransomware landscape that has received significant changes in 2024, as victims just aren't paying like they used to, which has caused attackers to shift their tactics. To read all about these new tactics, see the top 50 ransomware strains and amazing graphs, head down to the link in the show notes. Now, on to our episode. Hi, my name is Caitlin Barnett, and I'm the Director of Regulation and Compliance here at Chainalysis, and I'm really excited to be talking to Trisha this morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Trisha. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Caitlin, for having me. I'm Trisha. I'm the founder and CEO of Unit 21.
Let's get right into it. Why don't we start with just some basic stuff? Early on in your career, you had a few internship stints at Google. What was your experience like working for a FANG company so early on in your career?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to work at many different types of tech companies during my summer internships. And what I really loved about my internship at Google was just learning how they created this culture of experimentation in engineering. So once a week, you can work on a 20% project. And so it could be something completely unrelated to work. It could be something related to work too, but it could be, you're creating a Lego structure or something like that. And I thought even if that particular 20% concept may not be applicable to your company, what I really loved is that it created a culture of you can build things and you can do things and you don't need to be in a regimented way that you're working. So it gives you the ability to be more creative. And that was really amazing learning from those companies, because even though they are, of course, really huge, $1 trillion+ companies today, they have a bent of experimentation still.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now, as a CEO and founder, are there any strategies, policies, or standards that you learned during your time at Google that you've applied to Unit 21?
Yeah, so I'll give an example. We have a hackathon every year at Unit 21, and it's for a week that the engineering and product teams, they don't, work on the specific projects for Unit 21. It could be something related to Unit 21 that they want to do, but they often just do anything and any crazy thing. And a lot of our greatest ideas have come from these hackathons. That's been really great to incorporate on an annualized basis to have a week like that.
That's super interesting. So you also spent 3 years as a product manager at a firm, and as one of the first buy now, pay later companies. What were some of the projects you were working on as an early engineer?
I worked on several projects. I was a part of the team that wrote the original ledger, as well as I built a lot of the early risk related projects. And that got me exposed to a lot of the problems in the space of fraud and AML, which led to the birth of Unit 21.
That's amazing. So fast forward almost about a decade later, right? What are your thoughts on BNPL? And do you feel that this has benefited society or enabled the young generation to spend on items that they can't afford?
Yeah, it's a great question. I overall think BNPL, what was really interesting about the way that a firm was approaching it was instead of just using the FICO score as an ingredient, they were using several other factors and giving opportunities for people to get a loan if they need it, who may not have typically been eligible, but not because they could not have the ability to repay. And so I think that is a really great aspect of a firm is it is expanding financial services to more people instead of, very typical. And I'll give an example. Let's say if you're an immigrant in the US and you have no credit history, but you have the ability to repay a loan, you're just not going to get it. So unless you have a lot of credit history, your FICO is not going to be good. And there are many people, for many reasons, they don't have that. So I definitely am very appreciative of a firm and other companies' contribution to expanding the reach of financial services.
So before we get into Unit 21, can you give us the existing state of fraud and maybe some high level stats that will level set the conversation and the importance of fraud detection and prevention?
Yeah, absolutely. So fraud is prevalent significantly and only increasing. In particular, from an existing state perspective, in the last 2 years, ChatGPT has and other AI tools have become really big. And what the implication of that is that it's not only available to, regular people who are using it for whatever purposes that they want, but also to fraudsters. And fraudsters are using it for very sophisticated scams. So I'm sure everyone has received the Nigerian prince email at some point in their life. And you know that it's a scam because you know that there's spelling mistakes and punctuation errors and it's absolutely insane. It's like a Nigerian prince. But now the scams are getting very realistic. It really looks and reads like a proper request for money that is very believable. And the scams are getting also quite scary in terms of one of the cases that we saw at Unit 21 was that there is a grandparent that received a voice note from their grandchild saying that, hey, I need some money, please don't tell mom and dad about it.
Oh
And
no.
and it was a voice clone using AI, which was really believable. And the grandparent, of course, sends the money to the grandchild. And only after several months do they even realize that this has happened. So the scams are increasing at a really prolific rate. In fact, the FBI says it's the highest growing financial crime, and it's growing by over 23% year over year.
Wow, 23% is really insane. I mean, just the amount of spam calls that I'm getting, I can only imagine how many are out there in general. All right, so talk to us a little bit about Unit 21. With so many regtech and fraud fighting SaaS companies supporting the financial sector, what problem did you and the team set out to solve that you felt wasn't being appropriately handled in the market?
When we started the company, we started with primarily two products, transaction monitoring and case management. And what we found was not being handled well is that while there are a lot of anti fraud and AML software companies, they were primarily serving banks. Banks have more straightforward products. There's a checking account, a savings account. But for crypto companies, it's not really a checking account. It's, you can put money, you can trade. And banks didn't have the concept of, okay, how do I translate something that I built for a bank into something for a crypto exchange? So at Unit 21, we realized that what is really important is to have a very flexible and customizable transaction monitoring engine where you can put in your own data that is tailored to your own business. You can put in your own types of logic to identify suspicious activity that is again tailored for your own business, and you can create your own workflows that is tailored to your own business. And that was our main focus area, which is how do we enable companies that have really unique business models.
Yeah, I feel like customization is always the biggest feature request that, we get on the Chainalysis side as well. So it's super important that you guys are tackling that. And then was there a specific area of fraud that you and the team were focused on? And if so, how has your product suite evolved since then?
Yeah, we focus in general because the goal is really data model that is customized. Ultimately, we are able to solve really any type of fraud that you're interested in. And you can write logic to identify any type of fraud. The biggest use cases, I would say, within Unit 21 are three types of fraud. The first is scams, the second is ACH fraud, and the third is first party fraud. And I would say these are the biggest three areas of fraud that we see our customers use us for. But because the data model is so customizable and so flexible, and that's really the way that the product is built, it can work to solve any type of fraud.
That's awesome. So, what are the biggest trends that you're seeing in fraud, especially as we enter 2025? And how do companies like yours help clients mitigate these risks?
Yeah, so the biggest trend I would say is the proliferation of scams. And we're really excited about two things. Firstly, in the identification of scams, the way Unit 21 works is instead of just doing transaction monitoring, we look at all of the user activity across everything that the user has done. So we look at things like the login or the password changes or the admin changes. And we'll say, okay, if you send just $10,000 in itself, it may not be that suspicious, but if you just change your password and then you send $10,000, that's a really important signal. And for a lot of
Absolutely.
scams, it's very difficult to detect typically because the person who's getting scammed, has intent to send the money. Like they actually believe that they are in a romantic relationship. And
I
so
know.
or whatever the type of scam is, or they're going to have like an investment, really great investment outcome. And so they're often doing it from their own device, from their own IP address. So the typical signals that are used to identify fraud don't really work for scams. And that's why our main focus is use all of your data, because then that'll enable you to identify any type of breadcrumb the scammer is leaving in things like password changes, admin changes, etc.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's so heartbreaking too when you see people falling for these various scams, and to your point, they think it's legitimate and it's so difficult to try to explain to them otherwise. So can you walk us through some of the use cases where you feel that Unit 21 is completely dominating the industry and what clients know you for most?
Yeah, I would say there are two main. The first is for within fraud detection, the ability to be able to iterate really quickly because of our customizable transaction monitoring engine. And the transaction monitoring engine is super customizable. So you have the ability to create your own risk ratings, leverage that in your logic, the ability to test against historical data, run A/B tests on your rules, and then use that to identify any type of fraud that you're interested in. And the second is AML. A lot of companies leverage us for anti-money laundering regulation. And we have not only a transaction monitoring system, but also a case management system that enables three things. First is really deep dive investigations. Second is regulatory filing and meeting of regulatory obligations. And the third is automation. So we have a lot of automation inbuilt. So you don't have to scale your risk and compliance teams at the same rate as your business is scaling.
That's always a positive for compliance departments for sure. So we see that you also support many crypto and blockchain companies, including Crypto.com, Backed, and Wealthsimple as some examples. When did you first get introduced to crypto personally and then as a business?
Personally, it was like the early days and everyone was talking about it and it was like this crazy new thing and is Bitcoin going to take over the world in like 2 years. But as a business, it was really from the DNA as well. With respect to the types of companies that Unit 21 set out to serve, it is companies that want the degree of control and flexibility over the type of data that they're sending. They don't want to just say that, oh, I'm only going to send ACH transactions or I'm only going to send wire transfers. They want to be able to send information about, all right, I have this concept like an NFT, and this is what the NFT is, and your is the price that it was last traded at. And they have the ability to customize that and send that type of data over and then be able to monitor whatever they want and have the workflows from a regulatory standpoint that they can again customize for their unique businesses. So crypto has been there from day one because of the really high need for customizability within the crypto industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, would you say there are any crypto specific fraud typologies that your company has detected? And, if so, why do you think this fraud happens in crypto more than it does in traditional financial institutions or fintechs?
I would say scams is again the biggest. 40% of our customers who block their users are blocking them because of scams. And of the 40%, about a third is because of elder abuse. Crypto is, the vectors of fraud are the same, whether it's crypto or whether it is a traditional bank. Ultimately, there are two ingredients for any fraudster. That's need and greed. And as long as you capitalize on that greed for an investment or need for, hey, I'm going to turn off your electricity because you haven't paid this bill, so you need to pay
Yeah.
it now. And that's what we see within the crypto industry as well. So the main ingredients are the same, but scams in particular is higher in crypto because of the ability for really fast money movement and the ability to eventually have it be potentially obfuscated in some ways. And that's what our partnership with Chainalysis that we've now had for several years is really great to bring light into what is the end destination for crypto.
I think I'm going to steal this meet and greet. I've never heard that before, but that summarizes it perfectly. So, we're going to switch gears a little bit. In the last 6 months, we would say the biggest buzzword in the industry has been AI. So, how are you seeing bad actors take advantage of this evolving technology to conduct the fraudulent activity against your customers?
Fraudsters are the most entrepreneurial and creative people of our times. They were the first ones. They were like, we're going to get on this. And the way that they've leveraged it is, I'll give an example. And this is a public case. In Hong Kong last year, there was a hedge fund that lost $25 million dollars to a deepfake scam. And the way it worked is someone was pinged by the CFO saying that, hey, you need to send 25 million bucks. And in a hedge fund, this is not atypical to send these high dollar amount of transactions. And this person who made the transaction, they said, hey, let's get on a Zoom call and let's check and talk about it. And they got on a Zoom call, and because it was a deep fake, the person thought that, okay, the CFO was real and sent that money over. And that's showing how prolific this is becoming. Even if you take the right measures, the fraudsters are a step ahead. And so it's really important as an industry that we aren't averse to leveraging technology, because we will be the ones falling behind.
We always kind of make the analogy, it's almost like whack-a-mole, right? Like as soon as you figure out that one pattern and get that down, somebody else pops up very quickly with another way to get around it. So I totally agree with your first point that they are probably the most sophisticated, smart people when it comes to utilizing this new technology. But criminals aren't the only ones using this technology. So how has Unit 21 been able to use AI, and how can compliance departments use it to combat financial crime?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're seeing in the increase in fraud and scams around the world is just there's more work for companies to do. There's more alerts they need to review. They just need more bodies. And that's not scalable. So what we have done is we launched an AI agent this past year. And the goal of the AI agent is that a lot of the operations on an alert review from a compliance standpoint is what I would say hunter-gatherer kind of work, right? Like getting the data and making some type of analysis on it. That, hey, have you seen this IP address for this user before? Or has the user sent this money ever before to this particular account? And what we are doing is all of that work can now be done with AI. And so we're getting that information and automatically completing the tasks that are needed, and then presenting the final summary of findings to the compliance team. And there's a human in the loop. The compliance team is making the final decision. But the goal is that AI is being leveraged in a way that is both explainable to a regulator, ensures high accuracy, and ultimately has a human under control. So we're getting the benefit of AI, but making sure that it's something that is going to work from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the next question I had for you, because the conversation is increasingly about how AI will replace analysts or investigators. Like you just said, a lot of the administrative tasks associated with fraud and AML investigations. So what are your thoughts on this, and how should fraud fighters better equip themselves to handle the future of work in fraud?
Definitely, I think this is a transformative shift in technology and in the future of work. I think this is going to be amazingly exciting. Firstly, already fraud and compliance teams are underwater all the time, and this will enable them to free up their time to work on the more important things. And really, what are humans the best at? Humans are the best at judgment. And that's where we should be focused, is on more creative analytical work, understanding where are the trends going, what are we seeing within our customer base as a fraud fighter, and deploying logic and models to identify that, instead of getting IP address data across your different tools and then resolving it and seeing, is this IP address from a country that is of a high risk. So that is really the way that ultimately we think is most important, is for companies and for fraud fighters and the compliance heroes, who really are the heroes of our time, for them to lean into the more creative work that is going to be the future of this work in this industry.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the takeaway for anyone listening to this is embrace the technology rather than being scared that it's going to replace your job. Utilize it to get rid of the boring, dull work that nobody wants to do day in and day out. And so you can focus on the more complex, interesting aspects of these jobs. So you already kind of spoke a bit about one example of a deep fake. Our next question is, deep fakes and using AI to modify international identification documents seems to be rampant. How is your software able to detect AI use by criminals and properly apply risk to customers?
So traditional KYC is dead. And The reason is that when actually you think about fraud and why it's growing so much, all fraud happens after KYC. Fraud happens after the company has made sure that the customer is passing all of the relevant checks that are needed to create an account. So KYC by itself, when people often think about, hey, I want to prevent identity theft, I want to prevent fraudsters from onboarding into my company, KYC by itself is not a silver bullet. And the way to solve it is to leverage the totality of your data. Leverage the data that is, of course, KYC and your transaction data, but also the user action and the user behavior, and see if there are any breadcrumbs that have been left by the fraudsters throughout this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Unit 21 came out with a state of fraud and AML report. And within this report, you listed some of the main trends that you've seen after surveying hundreds in the industry. And one of the major trends is what you would call the scamdemic. There have been many of your webinars and our podcasts that have been centered around pig butchering. This is an extremely complex and long con scam. Can Unit 21 better prepare end consumers and clients to fight back against these scams?
Scams, it's going to be really crazy, and we've already seen some really creative scams, and it's only going to increase in the next several years. So we have a three-pronged approach to solve this. The first is, as a company, you should be educating your customers, and you should do the work to make sure that your customers understand what are the signals of a scam. If someone's asking you to pay immediately, if you don't know the sender, you should have some type of code word with your family to ensure that it's a legitimate payment request. The second, with respect to Unit 21, is you need to move from transaction monitoring to data monitoring. People think of like, hey, I should monitor my suspicious activity and identify any potential red flags. But what's more important is not just suspicious activity in your transactions, but across the user lifecycle. There's a plethora of data that is not being used by most companies to identify suspicious activity, and that needs to change. And then finally is to participate in a consortium. So we launched a consortium about 2 years ago, and we've seen tremendous growth. The goal of the consortium is to share data proactively about bad actors. And we are already seeing this with so much utility. Today, fraudsters are the most collaborative people as well. They have WhatsApp groups where they're exchanging information. They have YouTube channels where you can learn about how to commit check fraud. But the industry doesn't have that. So it's really important as an industry. If we are fighting against a very collaborative, tight-knit community, we also need to do that. And so participating in a consortium to get signal if someone has previously blocked this user, and it's a really useful yellow flag to take a look at that account again.
I think you're 100% right. And I do think within the crypto industry specifically, we're really good at collaborating and sharing information because we realize, this is one big effort that we all have to put into it to make this industry successful. Fraud AML is a word that we have seen often, which highlights the inefficiencies that plague traditional and fintechs, with fraud and AML teams being siloed. Do you think that we're seeing more unification of these teams, or are there reasons this is harder to execute in practice?
Yeah, definitely. There's a big trend in the last several years of FRAML, to combine these efforts. And historically, fraud and AML would be two separate teams, two separate tools. It doesn't make sense. Ultimately, what is AML? AML is also finding suspicious activity. The only difference between fraud and AML is the final outcome. Within fraud, you might block an account. Within AML, you may or may not block an account, but you will file a regulatory report. So there are ways that you can have both teams leverage the same tools, the same data, and most importantly, get value of seeing that, hey, this user was previously looked at by the AML team or by the fraud team, and they mark them as a false positive or true positive. Use that signal to improve the false positive rate in your transaction monitoring engine.
Yeah, and this kind of leads into our next question, where in places like Canada and others, there's often a debate about whether or not fraud should be reported to FIUs and suspicious activity reports. And there are arguments for both sides of this debate. What are your thoughts specifically on reporting fraud?
Yeah, I believe suspicious activity is suspicious activity, and the FRAML approach of really identifying fraud and also reporting it is really important, and that provides a more holistic picture. Money laundering, the folks who are committing money laundering are often the same folks who are committing these types of scams. Today, if I get money from a scam, I'm often going to use money mules to get the money back into my account. And this whole bifurcation today, we are already seeing for a lot of companies, they're relooking at this from a first principles perspective and saying, okay, does this really make sense? And modifying the approach.
So almost every fraud Regtech talks about lowering false positive, but it doesn't seem like they've been reduced over the last few years. What is stopping the industry from lowering these false positives, and what has worked for your clients using Unit 21?
It's a great question. I completely agree. Everyone talks about reducing false positives, but why are there still false positives? And really, there are two major components for this. One is that companies often don't provide the testing capabilities to test different logic. So, if today you are testing by effectively having a rule in production, then there isn't that capability for you to tweak an experiment. So the experimentation culture has not set in this industry yet. It's very much like I'm going to create 10 rules. Those are my rules that are going to be my rules throughout the year. And that needs to reduce if the false positives need to reduce, as you need to constantly be playing with the data. Which I'm
Yeah.
really hopeful that with AI, that this is going to really free up time for people to do that, more importantly. And then secondly, companies still think of transaction monitoring as like, I'm going to monitor my transactions instead of monitoring my data. And so they miss out a lot of useful signals that can be helpful in reducing false positives.
Absolutely. So, super exciting. You just announced the launch of your watch list screening product. And one of the features with this tool is almost having a simulated environment where you test the rules before deploying so you can see what types of false positives you will be dealing with. Do you think this is a game changer for the industry?
We're really excited about it, and we've seen such great enthusiasm. And again, watch list, sanctions reviews, PEP reviews, they're the canonical false positive generator. And just being able to test and tweak things before you deploy is so powerful, and we're really excited about that.
That's amazing. You also announced that you helped clients file over 100,000 SARs with FinCEN. What were some of the findings from all those SARs filed, and what do you expect in 2025 to be the main driver of your client SAR filing?
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We filed 3% of all SARs in the US, and that's been really great to see our customers get the degree of automation that they should have always had, but they're getting it with Unit 21. And I would say a really big trend that we are seeing is in the proliferation of scams. Scams is increased a lot in with respect to what we are seeing in our SAR filing data. And that is, completely in line with what we are seeing across the industry as well. So that's one of the biggest things. But by far, we would say the biggest reason that people file is transaction with no apparent economic business or lawful purpose, which is really a combination of many, many different things. So as an example, elder abuse, even between 2023 and 2024, grew over 100%. And that's exactly like transaction with no lawful purpose.
Yeah.
So we are seeing a lot of increase in the type of elder abuse. Money mules saw almost a 5x increase. So money mules and elder abuse, even compared to 2023, we're seeing so much of an increase in.
It's wild. Well, this is really exciting. You have been recognized as a top entrepreneur in the industry, so congratulations there. What do you believe have been the key skills for your success that other aspiring entrepreneurs could learn?
Yeah, I'm very grateful for these recognitions. What I would say is the most underrated aspect is the amount of repetition. You have to talk about what you do, what your industry does all the time. You have to talk about it to your customers, to your potential customers, to your employees, to your potential employees, to your investors, to your potential investors. You're constantly repeating yourself. And the biggest thing that I would say as an entrepreneur you can do is find something that you think is really interesting and cool that you actually want to repeat yourself all the time for years on an end.
Well, hopefully we asked some different questions to you during this podcast, so you weren't constantly repeating yourself. Your team has grown rapidly, though, and there are still many job postings by Unit 21. What challenges have you faced with a growing team, especially amongst a lot of the political instability and the bull and bear markets in both traditional and crypto industries?
It's definitely a really interesting time in this industry because the industry is constantly changing and people's comfort with it is constantly changing. Really, what we have found to be the most useful is to have people who really deeply care about the mission. Our goal is to stop bad actors to deliver justice and safety to the world. That's what we do. And today, because of the work that our team is doing, which, I'm taking almost no credit for, it's like they're amazing, but the work that they're doing is preventing so many elders from losing all of their life savings. It's preventing
Yeah.
so many people from having the money to send their kids to college. And these are real life-changing impacts that you don't see on a daily basis. You don't really appreciate like, oh, 2x increase in elder abuse, okay. But it is a human at the end of the day who is losing all their money and facing a really horrible blow to their life. And for us, finding people who are mission-oriented is really important.
Yeah, and I think it makes the job more fulfilling, right? To actually feel like you're making a difference in the world. So what new features, service offerings are on your roadmap for Unit 21, or are there any projects in the industry that you're keeping your eye on specifically?
Yeah, AI is a really big focus for me. AI is something that will be a transformative shift in the industry. We are leveraging AI agents significantly to reduce 80% of the L1 operations so that companies can work on more strategic, important things. And we're really excited about that.
That is super exciting. 80% is a very large number, so I'm sure your customers are very happy. So, one final question from us. What is the best method for listeners to see what you're working on and connect with you on social media?
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn or feel free to DM me if you want to find some more time to connect about any trend that you are seeing or if you're interested to learn more about Unit 21.
Trisha, thank you so much for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and we're so excited to see what comes next for Unit 21.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for having me.
Fraud and scams look a lot different than I remember them when I worked at the exchanges. Before you go, remember to share this episode with one friend who is interested in crypto as much as you are. We appreciate all your support, but the only way we are able to continue to find the best guests in the industry is by word of mouth and growing our audience. One last thing, with upcoming MiCA regulations in the EU and the geopolitical hotspots popping up overnight, now is the most important time to really know the virtual asset service provider that you are dealing with. Chainalysis has just announced their partnership with Luca to integrate critical off-chain information into our popular VASP risking product. Our customers now gain a more comprehensive view of a VASP with consolidated data of interest, such as including legal entity names, regulatory licenses, and jurisdictional information. This gives a more holistic view for your risk assessments. To check out all the details of the new partnership, head down to the link in the show notes.